Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Solomon Blair. On behalf of Pitch Dev Studios, we have a very special presentation for you on the creation of Finch, which is an Apple Plus original movie. But first, to kind of preface, to give a little bit of description on Pitch Dev Studios, they are a design house that works in film, entertainment, video games. They've got a wide array of skills and abilities on their team. We actually do have a great reel for you to kind of give you a breath of the kind of work that they do. So let's take a look. Amazing. So to get started in this presentation talking about Finch, I'd like to first introduce to you all our guests, David Levy. You want to take the stage here and just give a little description of what you do?
Yeah, so I've been a concept artist for more than 25 years now, starting in the video game industry. And I've been in the movie industry now for almost around the same time, 12, 13 years. And I've started as designer. I've done everything, designing, art directing, and everything in between. So there you go.
Amazing. Well, we've got a lot to talk about on all of those subjects. Other special guest, Alex Konstad. How you doing, man? Give us a little description on... Tell us a little bit about your involvement in this project.
Yeah, I've been a concept artist for, I don't know, the last 10, 12 years. Currently art directing at Netflix, working primarily in animation. I was an illustrator by trade before I went into concept art, so I think that's kind of lent itself to the stuff I do primarily, which is kind of mood painting and story beats, which is what David brought me on to this project for. Kind of helped establish a mood and tone for the world at the beginning of this, and had a great time.
Awesome. Yeah, this particular topic, Finch, is an incredibly beautiful movie. It's a very dark and desolate environment, but the work that you guys have done here to create and fill this space is truly incredible, and I'd love to get into the discussion on the art. First, let's give a brief preview to the movie Finch for those that haven't seen it. This is a brief spoiler, so you might want to skip this part if you haven't seen it. If you have, enjoy.
It all happened so fast. There was a solar flare. Goodbye crops and food, goodbye everything. So I hid, frightened and so alone. And I found you. What shall we have? Get your elbows off the table. Get your elbows off the table. All right, you're next. You see, I'm developing something interesting. Giant leap of faith. Now, if you can speak, tell me something about you.
Robots must protect dog.
If we don't go before that storm hits, we'll die, all of us. As soon as you can walk, we're leaving.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
That's falling.
1, 2.
Head west, over the mountains.
Would you like me to drive?
Don't oversteer. That's oversteering.
Sorry.
Ease your foot up just a hair. Perfect. Hey, what's all the fuss?
I learned to talk dog. I don't think it likes me. Come and see this.
Tie the Harvey down. Hang on to something. We should be safe once we get into the mountains. But things will happen. Like 150-degree heat, UV radiation, and people hiding in the shadows.
You think we'll make it?
Not without my team. What we do together.
I believe in you, Finch.
Amazing. Just even watching the trailer, I find it to be an incredibly touching story. What I found so fascinating about this particular film is that it's primarily focused on a few characters, which really puts a lot of pressure and emphasis for you designers on building that world and building those virtual digital characters that you guys have had a hand in. What I'd love to kind of jump into, Alex, is at the beginning stages of production design, where do you begin this process, and what were the first things that you guys sort of tackled when you were pitched for this project?
I think, everything needed to be relatable to the audience. It needed to have a humanistic approach to design. And, our big problems to solve were how, in a movie that has such a small cast, how could you create something that's, able to empathize with the audience? And how can you establish kind of a design sense that people feel, any kind of relationship with this robot, because we're going to be, hanging out with him for a couple hours. So I think David had a great kind of direction to start us all off in and kind of steer us in the right design language that kind of made this robot relatable for everybody.
So you guys really tackled the vision of how Jeff the robot would be portrayed, as well as the environments, I assume, as well, were incorporated in these particular designs. Were these just conceptual images that you guys started with first?
Well, I can be more specific regarding that because, the art direction of the whole movie was done by the production designer. It's usually how it works, and the director himself. And so both of them really, before myself and before Alex jumped on board, had a very clear idea. And like Alex said, what was really key for us was to find the right balance between something very mechanical, like a electric toothbrush, but at the same time that could be very, very friendly. And from the start, I remember the director gave us like a small sketch that he had done, like very. But from the start, what was really key is that they told us we don't want the usual robot from the usual movies. We want something that is very heartwarming, and that's why at the beginning, I'm rolling back a little bit because there's a lot to say. Even before the project started, is that Alex and I met when we were working on Scoob for Warner Bros. And we found such a great way of working together. Basically, Alex does his stuff, I do my stuff. He's so easy to work with that as soon as I got a call, he's the first person I called, basically. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we jump into everything else.
Well, I'd definitely say that's an understatement to sell it as doing your stuff, because the kind of work that you guys are doing is truly incredible. We do have some images that we could take a look at, just conceptual pieces that were, I believe these were preliminary sort of works in the process. You guys want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Sure. If we can switch to my screen. So here goes. So this is one of the first speed painting that Alex did. So I'm not going to talk on this. That should be Alex's job.
Yeah, I mean, I think the brief was, relatable robot in a desolate, kind of bleak environment, and that juxtaposition of how do we stage these characters in a way where everything isn't completely grim. I think, like David said, Tom, the production designer, had a good kind of initial brief for us to kind of really sink our teeth into and get everything going based off of what the director and the writers were going for. So I think for here, it was just about how do you make these wind-swept, desert-infested kind of city landscapes feel at least somewhat charming with the robot and his dog going through. So that was kind of some of the first stuff I tackled. Kind of human moments amidst the apocalypse.
I'm going to jump super quick on this. Is that the production designer, before we started, was very clear on the kind of team that he wanted. he really wanted, especially at the beginning, to have people that had done animation, had worked in animation before. And the reason why is that he knew that when you have a concept artist that work in animation, there's a form of visual poetry that comes with it, an illustrative, I guess, trait that comes with it that usually is not always there when you do either like hardcore set design or hardcore mechanical design. And that's what they wanted to see before we got into the mechanical stuff. They really wanted to have that feeling of poetry even before we got deeper.
Yeah, I believe that for me, that really shows through in the experience of watching the movie. Question I have for you guys is just in this particular design aesthetic, what do you find is the most challenging in trying to make a robot character feel more human? This in particular is something that's not necessarily the first attempt. You could go back to Short Circuit all the way up to, Chappie, for example. What you guys have done here is a new take on that. So what did you find is the biggest challenge in trying to revamp that idea?
Well, I mean, I can start. I'd say that what's great about Alex's work when he works on the speed paintings is that just given the pose of the character, and that's what the concept art is very important for on a project, is not only to give like a design idea. I mean, design is important, but design exists also in posing. Designs exist in lighting. Designs exist in texturing, in coloring. And when you have a speed painting like that from Alex, you hit all those question marks with I guess with a lot of, let's say, balls, because you gotta feel free and have the artistic skills in order to throw that into a speed painting. So I think that's one of the key elements for that. Alex, I don't know what.
I think robots are something that always probably back from like Terminator. It can come across as cold and calculated and soulless. And I think, a lot of that in like Terminator films came with acting, came with gesture, came with screen presence. So I think for me, that was the first thing David and I talked about was like, aside from the actual physical visual design, how could we make the robot in Finch feel so human? And that came through the posing and kind of, for me, on these first initial moments, the humanity in this robot and how is the posing and the acting, how does that come through in a story moment? So it's, I tried to pick moments that you don't normally see robots in cinema, I guess, contemplative moments, human moments, quieter moments and things like that. So that was kind of my big focus on these.
Yeah, that focus in particular paid off so well, I think, just from the visual images that we're looking at here and that being translated through animation. I noticed so many small moments of even just like hand gestures. And as you mentioned, posing, sort of not being perfectly upright like a Terminator, for example, and sort of having a slouch, and those humanistic qualities absolutely show through in these images. So it's great to see that thought process really pays out in full as it fully comes to fruition in the final film.
Yeah, what you're saying is actually very specific and very accurate, because the director and the production designer very early, I mean, and that's what's great about working with guys like that, is that they throw ideas at us. They're like, oh, a jacket under the rain. Alex is like, I got it. I say, I got it. A jacket under the rain, robot dog. Okay, just that. I mean, for us, for me, reading the script the first time, I could not believe my eyes, because I was thinking, this is like an art house movie being made in Hollywood. I knew that this chance was never going to represent itself again. So I thought, this is a unique situation that we're into, and we were really planning on making the most out of it, Yeah.
Yeah, you could tell from the very beginning when you read that script at the very beginning. It's like, okay, this is something special. And I don't know about you, Dave, but Boy and His Dog is one of my favorite older movies, and that has a very, human post-apocalyptic vibe. And this immediately kind of rekindled all those emotions I had while watching that movie as a kid. It's my dad's favorite movie, so I watched it a lot, and it was, that just felt special in and of itself from the very beginning.
What I also find very interesting is the environment itself. As this topic or this environment is not necessarily a new concept, this sort of post-apocalyptic space, but as a designer, I can very much see there's so much weight put on you guys to be able to almost make that environment feel alive as well. and very much focused on that because you don't have as many primary characters to focus on or give backstory to. You're really playing that out as the story goes and as they're traveling across the space. And in terms of the environment itself, were you really responsible for sort of filling out those details, or was that something that was predetermined in this process?
No. I mean, at the beginning of a project, I mean, we once again as concept artists, they throw stuff at us, like I told you, like jacket, robot, dog, environment, and the script, of course, and our job as concept artists is to throw as much stuff at them as possible and see what sticks, and what sticks is whatever ticks the director. It's like, oh yeah, all those warm colors, all those. It has to be very. Our job has to be done so that the person who has to make the choices shouldn't have to think. It should be more of an emotional choice, So I think that's what we were trying to go with those images,
Yes, absolutely. That very much shows through in this process, and I can very much see the level of, I guess, emotion that's involved in these cinematic stills. When it comes to going from this process as we sort of transition into the 3D design and prop creation, what's the process here from taking this to full 3D where you can really start to envision how that final piece is going to look?
So this is another good example, where and I don't have the previous painting that Alex had done, but basically Alex had done this speed painting, this exact speed painting, and then and that's the way we work. Sometimes I start an image, sometimes Alex does, sometimes it's vice versa, sometimes it's the art director, sometimes the director sticks a photo into the image and we have to deal with it, and it's a very, very there's like a really non-ego kind of approach to the way we're trying to do those images. And when it comes to detailing and going more into details, it happens in a very organic way, where, for example, I took that image, and Tom, the production designer, who's a big ZBrush aficionado, had already started working on an arm and a chest. So what I did is I took Alex's painting, I did just the arm and the chest in there, and see what happens. Is the director going to hate it? Is he going to love it? Is he going to love it? I don't know, Alex, but what's your point of view on that? But I think it's a very hyper organic process.
Yep, no, I'd say the same thing. That was very hand in hand kind of design process where everything was building off of what came before it. And I think when you get to work with a team that has no egos, it's great because everyone's willing to work collaboratively and kind of help. Film is a group project, so it's great to work with everybody to make sure the end result is as good as it possibly can be.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Again, I feel like that it shows through. When you go through an experience of film like this, you really feel the love and the attention that is spent on these key elements that sometimes gets overlooked for many reasons. But Alex, I would love to know maybe a little bit about your process here, and just in terms of your style of painting and working. Are you primarily a 2D person, or do you kind of work back and forth between 2D and 3D in your concept?
I mean, back then when we were working on this, I was primarily a 2D person. Now I'm working in a lot more 3D, but yeah, I'm an illustrator by trade. So for me, it's, acting, personality, and then graphic shapes of the image, foreground, middle ground, background, make sure everything reads and looks correctly. And then, nuance the details after that. So I was, start out 2D.
Cool. It's very impressive work. I'd love to get into the next phase of this presentation on getting into some of our 3D design, if we could switch over to that. So we have a full presentation actually going into some of the design work, going into ZBrush itself. David, can you talk a little bit about just the process from going from that conceptual phase into the 3D design and the prop creation?
So yeah, as I mentioned before, it's something that's very organic, and starting with great paintings that Alex did, there's more details that are starting to, once we throw that at the director and the production designer, they throw stuff back at us. And usually it's in the form of huge amount of folders of images and references and stuff like that. So it's fed by the director, the production designer, the script, and ourselves. So it's like a big hub and a mix of an organic soup and see what comes out of that soup in some ways. At the same time, we have deadlines to face. We have a milestone in order to show stuff. So there's also an external pressure because they're already starting to prepare when they're going to film, where they're going to film, all that stuff. So it's kind of like a very, it's a very, very high energy process, I would say,
So I imagine there's a bit of gaps that you're filling in when you go from a conceptual design. You have a more of a feeling than anything else, an emotive sort of connection to the character. When you get into this phase, where do you begin with the design process? Right now, we're looking at Jeff, fully fleshed out with his mechanical structure and even some of the soft external components, which is a really nice touch, by the way. How do you begin a process like this?
Well, I mean, it starts with the script, of course, but like there are ideas that the production designer Tom Meyer, who's really good at that stuff, it's almost the goal is to be the least Captain Obvious as possible. It's like, and I'm sure Alex can support me in that thinking, is that I would say it's all driven by misdirection. Whatever you think people are going to expect, that's where you don't want to go. If people are expecting something that is super edgy, super strong, super straight, well, what's the opposite of that? What are we trying to convey here? And very, very early from the beginning, Alex can convey that is the production designer mentioned a teenager. So Alex, I don't know if you want to jump on that,
Yeah, I mean, I think there was always that, teenage slouch that I think there's a little bit of an innocence in teenagers as well that comes with, they haven't really experienced the world yet. They haven't gone through life like we have. They haven't been broken down by the realities of life. And Jeff being something built by Tom Hanks in the movie, I think that needed to be conveyed, that this was Tom Hanks's kind of last ditch effort to help out the dog as well. So it's, that story bit that came from the script needed to be conveyed visually. So that through the organic process of going back and forth with the directors, with David, with Tom, kind of helped push us into this realm that we ended up on with Jeff. And I think that constant feedback loop of making sure, everything felt human, do the unexpected, make sure it felt lively, handcrafted, it's kind of built out of scrap. I think all of that kind of, to use David's word, came together in this organic soup for what we see on screen.
Yeah, and actually, to answer your question, because earlier on I didn't answer it precisely, I would say that for that character, that specific character, while all the environments are also happening in the background, for the specific characters, there were a few things that Tom, for example, decided on the head coming from a gas tank. So that was one thing. I think that was the beginning of everything. When he started to think about that head coming from a gas tank, it really helped all of us to get into the mindset of the person who built it. So the guy is an engineer. The guy is a techie. He doesn't care about beauty. He doesn't care about elegance. He just wants to do things that are efficient. So and there were stories even that the director was telling us about. Well, he found this in the back of the factory. He chopped it off. He's like, okay, yeah, that's going to be a perfect container for the head because it can contain the hard drive. It can protect from water, from weather and stuff like that. So that's where it started. Then the second one, which was originally in the script, I think, was the fact that they wanted his hands to be very clearly hands that had to be built for him to be very humane, And right very early they said we want wood for the fingers and we want leather for the fingers. So we're like, okay, wood. Okay, he could have taken a piece of wood and sculpted it at the right shape for the fingers and stuff. Where would he have gotten the leather? Like, oh, maybe from a baseball bat glove, So these elements start to create like a portrait, if you want, I'm sorry, Yariv. I'm all over the place. I'm going from one to the other. But for the gloves is a good example that they were saying that the dog didn't like the robot at the beginning because the hands were cold, so he had to rebuild his hands entirely.
Oh, that's an interesting nod. I love the connection, and even just having Tom Hanks's opinion involved and how that can influence the design. But thinking of it from that perspective is very apparent as you describe it. But you wouldn't necessarily pick up on those things if you weren't too keen on every little detail. But the hands alone are such a great topic, and I actually didn't know that was a glove, which is such a cool detail of the character.
Yeah, the idea would be that he had chopped off a baseball bat glove that he would have, so that the dog wouldn't react negatively to the contact, basically.
Mm-hmm. So as far as the conceptual phase, you're still visualizing a lot of these elements and shapes as you're going through. How many design iterations did you guys go through, if there's even a clear number at this point?
Well, I mean, so this is great because this shows the images of some of the variations on the hands. There's a person who did the first variation on the hands, was Tully Summers, and I cannot talk enough about Tully Summers. Tully is an incredible artist that has zero presence online, and he comes from the old school. He comes from building props, designing them and building them, drafting them. And I met Tully on Tron Legacy. And I was really in a pinch. I was like, oh my God, I need a 3D artist to quickly help me with that hand because it's so complex and stuff. So he did the first pass, which is what you see there, based on sketches that Alex and myself had done. And that's what's great with Tully is that when I contact him, in one snap, he just gets it. So that removes a lot of the work, that may happen, But yeah, so that's a good example of iteration. But I know, Alex, you want to talk about iterations in our industry and on this project in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a natural part of what we do. If you don't iterate, you might get stuck with something that's not the most ideal version. And working with David's great because they're every iteration and every pass, and then working with Tom as well. There's so much thought that goes into why you're iterating and why you need to see more that I think it was a essential part of getting to where we needed to be for Jeff's design in general, because I think what we ended up with at the end after various iteration after iteration after iteration was the most kind of cooked down, reduced, concentrated version of all of the kind of symbolism everyone wanted from Jeff. So it's just an essential part of the job, I think, and it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is maybe a question for those designers out there that are, maybe not necessarily fully involved as much as you guys are. What do you find is the most challenging thing for a project like this to really bring to fruition and meet all expectations?
You want to go, or you want me to go, Alex? Or
I mean, the one thing I would say is that on projects like this, where the script is so good and moving from the very beginning, it is, for me, I think the biggest challenge is making sure you do that script justice and you do the director's vision justice to make sure what is on the page in that script has that same emotional impact and presence on screen once you get to that, final frame of what you see in the movie. So for me, it's just, and that comes through iteration and working with great people, is just making sure, the hardest part is just making sure that you do that script justice and you do that vision justice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe the toughest part as an artist at the beginning is, like Alex says, is that, okay, we have this great thing on our plate, but how do we don't screw it up? So that's for sure. I mean, that's the horror nightmare from every concept artist, I think, is to feel that we were not able to answer the vision of the director or the production designer as best as we could, But at the same time, knowing that it's like jumping out of an airplane, we know that we have the practice and the skills, grown over the years, and we try to rely on that as much as we can. And but the pressure is real. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts can be just doing the research and doing the right amount of research. I think we were lucky on this project to work with Tom and the director, who were very very adept at doing research, and we were provided folders and folders and folders of JPEGs, which kind of we sifted through to make sure we had the right reference points for whatever we were designing. But if you don't have that kind of research being provided by the people you're working with, that can become one of the hardest parts, is like what's the direction you need to take just for that research? What kind of references do you need to gather, and what kind of stuff do you need to sift through to get the best starting point you have? And we were very fortunate on this show to have a great, strong direction from the beginning.
No, it's true. I mean, the reference work, I'd say, is probably so that we can hit the ground running as artists. Having a proper amount of reference is primordial, you know, and the more the better. And usually, I'd say that a big part of our job is to be able to ingest all that information, to regurgitate it into a shape that's matching the project, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I get a real sense for, in this particular project, this sense of trust and camaraderie, as well as just shared information that seems to pay out in full. And again, it's not always the case. I imagine you guys have had experience in other projects where you don't get as much and you need to fill in the gaps more. But in this particular case, just that symbiotic kind of relationship with you guys being able to work so close together very much shows through in all of this design work and in the story as well. I'd be curious to know a bit more about some of the other projects and pieces that you guys focus on. So Jeff is a big key component in the story, obviously maybe the most prominent next to Finch. But as far as all the other elements that you worked on, I know that we have Dewey is a project that we could maybe take a look at and go into some of the design work. Or did you guys want to speak a little bit about just general functionality? I see there's such a breadth of creative work here. There's so much to discuss. I don't want to skip over any of it if there's any particular topics that you guys would like to bring up.
No, I think it's a good point. What this shows, I think, is the amount of love that was put into that character. You know, for every inch, there's not 1 inch of that character that was not done multiple times. You know, and tried in combination with others and broken up and it can be overwhelming at times, you know. But that's why so many projects are difficult, is because it's doing a movie or working on a movie is like you're throwing tons of cards in the air and you're doing everything you can to make sure that all those cards fall back into a spot that makes a castle, you know. So there's more chances that everything is going to go wrong than everything goes right. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that those cards fall into places, you know. And this is a good screen, you know, showing like the hunch back and things like that, you know. But,
yeah. I think it's real easy on working on shows that have so many people and so many cooks in the kitchen for things to get lost and maybe not become the best version it can be through each stage of the pipeline. But when you work with a group of people where everyone's communicating and working efficiently together, this is a great example of like every step Jeff went through the pipeline, things got better and better, more concentrated, more evolved, more nuanced. And I think just the final work on screen really speaks to that collaborative process that everyone put in on this.
Absolutely. I can attest to that. Just it's very wonderful to see something like this that comes through and to be able to feel that as you experience it. And even just from a non-designer perspective, getting into just the asymmetrical details that were highlighted in some of these cards is just really wonderful to see that much attention to detail that brings you back and makes you want to watch the film again over and over because you catch these little things that, you know, you might not see the first go.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That asymmetry, I think, is something that started with the teenager, the gesture, the posing, and that was one of those initial things that's like we latched onto at the very beginning in the art department, and then we made sure. And David, you kind of finished this out and saw it all through, so you could probably speak more to that. But that asymmetry, that imbalance, that imperfection was something that I think was a guiding thread through every stage of the pipeline.
Fully agreed. I mean, that was right from the beginning, from the first sketches, and production designer was very clear, and the three of us were so on board with that. Like, yes, no symmetries, you know. Let's make sure that, because if it's handmade, you know, we don't know the things that he has and he has to replace with and stuff like that. So asymmetry was a very important key point for sure. And
Yeah, absolutely. Again, from the designer, you guys working so often in probably more often than not required to iterate in rapid succession, where you have to create so many things. So symmetry is a great benefit to kind of shortcut things, but having a very focused character where you don't have to populate a whole world of robots or aliens or anything else in between, you get to spend that time and that energy on these little details in that asymmetrical form.
Yeah, I think there's something very poetic about asymmetry, because if you look at everything, and we can say that in nature symmetry is everywhere and stuff like that, but if you look closely, it is not. If you look at a butterfly, you can say, oh yeah, both wings are the same, but if you look closely, they are not. And those little details are very unconscious, and those unconscious details, as the designers, when we apply them, create something unique on screen. Dewey is another example of that. Dewey, in big part, was designed by AJ, who's one of our guys, and also Nino Razzo, AJ Trahan and Nino Razzo. They worked first in speed painting, using the same process, speed paintings at first, then 3D models, and then detailed by a lot of us after. So, and these are a few of the sketches for Dewey. And Dewey was supposed to be kind of like the pre-dog,
right?
The dog that existed before Finch had the real dog.
I wanted to mention that particular detail was so wonderful in the script and in the story, and it does kind of bring you to just the passion that he has and the love that he has for his creations or the dog itself. But Dewey had a particular sense of realness to him, where he felt very much like a dog. He sort of played in a way, even just little head nods and movements. I'm seeing a lot of iteration here with Dewey in particular. Can you tell me a little bit about the growth of where you're going from that Boston Dynamics type like robotic movement? How did he evolve, and how did that sort of come to be the final design?
So I'd say that definitely the Boston Dynamic dog was kind of like the beginning thought behind it. And then it started to break apart, because we're like, well, what does it really need? It needs to carry stuff. It needs to carry food. Okay, the dog can be programmed to find food. But also it needs to have a camera. But we didn't want the camera to look too futuristic, which was an issue, because it was the head of the dog. So, and at some point it had no head, and that's when they had heads. And then at some point what we decided was to have a camera that was actually like a wink at filmmaking. It's a 16mm Bolex camera that is actually inset into the body, and that comes much later, not even in those images, because I think that came in one of the reference sketches that Weta took and implemented into their actual sculpt. So here we go. That, I think on that image on the right, I think there's something mentioned about the camera. Yeah, you see here, the old camera, parts, dial sprinkled, so it doesn't look too high tech or too low tech, So that was and that's where it started to. I think Dewey was, even though it's a character that is not primary character, was probably one of the most painful that we had the most trouble finding, because we were having trouble not it feeling too other kind of sci-fi movie-ish. We wanted to feel he's supposed to be a tool that has a little bit of AI. Mm-hmm. That was the thing, and it's not that easy to define, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was that nuance in the description and in the script that made it the hardest to find that, visual cohesion for everything.
Yeah. So this transition, I can very much see that being challenging to figure out the right way to go about it. You attacked the process of creating Dewey post Jeff, is that correct? Or was it happening at the same time?
Kind of happened at the same time, a little bit.
I would say it was at the same time. And that's the thing that's madness, is that on these projects, it's not just Jeff that we take our coffee, relax a little bit. Oh, let's work on Jeff for 6 months. It never happens that way. It's, tomorrow we have a presentation. We need 3 environments and 2 characters, rough, doesn't matter, sure something. Yeah, and when they say rough, they never mean it. They always want things to look awesome. So it's about like making sure that we can manage those expectations and try to deliver something good with the pressure of time, with the environments, characters. So I would say that a project like that usually starts with everything. it's very daunting at the beginning of a project like that because we're trying to like shoot wide, you know. Yeah.
Sure. I can imagine just having that little bit of detail coming from somebody like Tom Hanks who suggests like a specific thing like the head, that translates to, you get to a character like Dewey where you can start to formulate those same ideas and go, oh, okay, if that works for Jeff, I could apply some of that same logic to some of the functions in Dewey himself. Even just, you know, transitioning from, he has this sort of upright leg function and he can also roll, the functionality between having legs and feeling like a dog, but then also being a tool that can also, you know, quickly transform and, you know, roll out of a situation.
Yeah, and find food primarily. Right. I mean, which was kind of the key thing, you know.
In terms of design and just workflow, maybe we could talk a little bit about process here. So you guys are spending quite a lot of time in ZBrush. What do you find to be some of the best just functions and things that you love about designing in this space?
Well, especially when it comes to designing robots, there's a big danger that comes with working with other softwares, is that stuff looks too perfect, you know? And with ZBrush, you have that ability to add folds, to add life into something and imperfections. And you want to break something in ZBrush, like you want to break like an element and you want to make it look like it's been destroyed. Easy to do, you know? You want to build something, and these kind of things are so painful in other softwares that it becomes very hard to. It doesn't allow for freedom. That's what we love about ZBrush. That ZBrush allows us for freedom, you know.
Alex, in terms of your design process alone, being, you know, spending so much time in 2D for so long, have you found you've transitioned as well into this realm a bit? I know that we kind of briefly mentioned you've done some sculpting and some building.
Yeah, exactly what David said. Where I work primarily is poly modeling for set design, set building, and animation. And I've dabbled in poly modeling for industrial design, and it just, everything becomes rigid and sterile very quickly. So ZBrush is on the top of my list to kind of get back in my workflow because it's so easy to take something, make it feel industrial, make it feel machined, but then also kind of change it a little bit. So there's some wear and tear, there's some wobble to it. There's an element of like, this has been used, or, you know, this just feels more lively because things aren't exactly precise and clean and perfect. So now that I've dabbled in 3D, I can't argue or, you know, deny how useful and helpful it is, both in just seeing things turn in space, seeing how, I think in 3D, working on machined objects is also good because it makes you think about the feasibility of everything and the range of motion and all of those kinds of things as well. So it's a very important part of the pipeline for sure.
Yeah, that's so wonderful to hear your perspectives. I mean, for me, having been a former member of the creative development team at Pixelogic and still a ZBrush artist myself, having come from that poly modeling world, nothing really compares to the feeling of just being able to build and design and break things apart and really get into the asymmetry of things and spend that time. And it's what's so great to see about a project like Finch is, you know, the history of ZBrush, you know, coming from originally characters and organic type monsters and creatures, everything from the beginning of it all, which is really Lord of the Rings that really set it on its path. But now you see this evolution of a program that can be used not only for those things at a masterful level, but to get into mechanical building like this and hard surface and in a sort of amalgamation between organic and hard surface is so cool to see this breakup of detail here.
And I would say that for me, that project was already, I mean, it took a while for that project to come out because we worked on it years ago, like 2017 or something like that. So for me, that's where I got through the. It's never easy for me to relearn a full software. So I don't know, my brain may be limited. I don't know, but getting into ZBrush took me a while, you know. And that project really was the one that broke me. It was like, okay, I get it. I get the idea. I see how it works. And that's when I started feeling kind of a freedom with ZBrush, to the point where at the end, for the first time, I was not using my usual 3D software to do environments. You know, there's one of the environments in there that was made. entirely in ZBrush. And because this happened towards the end, it's the front of the building, where the truck is parked, under the tunnel.
I remember the scene. Yes.
Yeah. It's one of those, I think. Yeah, it's those at the bottom, exactly. If you go there, so this was a quick sketch I did. And if you go down, the 3D model that's underneath, yeah, that one, exactly. That environment was entirely in ZBrush. And I had never done that before. This is the first one I did in ZBrush. And I felt such freedom. And the thing that was very important was this environment specifically came towards the end of the project, and they were in the process of getting ready for filming already, and they needed a design very fast. And I thought, you know what? I feel comfortable. I feel confident. I'm going to take a risk. I'm doing this in ZBrush. And it went to construction like almost just 1 to 2 weeks later maximum.
Wow.
Like it went like boom, boom, from the sketch, 3D sketch to construction. And I was sweating bullets. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to like it. I don't know if they're, and the production designer was like, perfect, let's go for it, And so that's a testament to, a lot of people like to segmentize things, or ZBrush just for characters, or ZBrush. For me, I don't care. Whatever the tool gives me, I'll use it, And it may not be what you were intended it to be used for. It may not make you happy, but I don't care,
That's one of the great things about ZBrush as a whole. Just as a tool, it really has so many versatile applications. If you kind of just have more of a fluid approach to using the tools themselves, you can use one tool for 100 different things, which is very cool to see. You guys have been able to iterate and visualize on all aspects of creation here. And in particular in the environments, I think this is a great segue to maybe transition into this particular space, as we've spent some time talking about the characters themselves. In terms of the vehicles and just moving through the environment itself, tell us a little bit about the process of creating the vehicle itself.
So a lot of the groundwork was done by the production designer. And two of our guys, David Weiss, who's actually an industrial designer that works, that helps us at PitchDev, and Nino as well. So there was a group of different people that did sketch overs, paint overs. It was talk about like a collaborative process. I mean, this vehicle is just all over the place, and it's fine because the design itself kind of fits the need. It's supposed to be something that's been made out of different pieces, and we wanted it to feel like sturdy but not too sturdy. There's a lot of like very small, emotional things that had to go in there in order to make it feel believable, but not too techy at the same. So it's all those balance, and the vehicle kind of represents the same struggles we had with the characters, in that sense.
Right. So you're almost treating the vehicle as a character, because these are prominent
definitely
elements to the story. It very much felt it felt like a home. It was kind of a cool moment to see them, with the music playing and it transitioning to like hitting the road together, going on a trip, but it's still a familiar object. It's still an RV in a way, but it's a very decked out RV that can, function on sunlight and get through some pretty harsh environments, which is so cool to see. And it seems that you've gone through, again, it's just a series of iterations. And did you find that there were influences from Tom Hanks or others in terms of coming up with the idea for the final design?
So as a concept artist, we never, it's very rare that we have contact with actors, Usually there's a proper channel of command, that happens with the director, the actor, and the producers and stuff like that. So we are kind of at the end of the chain, and it's fine for us. We don't really want to get into that. So we I'm sure Alex can chime on that. But so for us, it comes in the shape of an email to us.
Don't want to fly too close to the sun.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good way to put it. So for us, it comes in the shape of an email, and we're like, oh, that changed. So, and we just go for it, and usually we explain why, of course. Yeah.
In terms of, there's tons of great conceptual images here. You guys did finally arrive on that space. In terms of the environments themselves, you've kind of gone through a lot of the conceptual phase, getting into 3D now. Environment really being the last sort of final creation phase and fleshing that out. Of course, some of that being live action footage, I imagine, with compositing. But in terms of design, tell us a little bit about just the environment creation process itself.
I mean, you want to? I've been talking a lot, so I want to leave it some to Alex as well.
Go, feel free. I'm along for the ride. I feel like I will say the big thing with the environment was I liked how in the script it was never explicitly stated, what exactly transpired on Earth that sent us all into disarray and kind of really fucked everything up. Pardon my language, but it should it needed to feel desolate. It needed to feel bleak. Everything needed to feel terrible. But I also think there was sand, this windswept desert sand was there from day one. And I think I had done one of those images that, it needed to feel like a mailbox with the house, but sand dunes needed to be all the way up to the roof's edge. So I think we just kind of took that, and then through David's production design with internally, art direction internally at Pitch Dev, and Tom Meyer, the PD for the show, kind of disseminated all of that. And through, again, like iterations, we ended up on the images that helped influence what you see on the movie.
It's a very cool element of the story in that you don't, as you described, you don't know necessarily what exactly happened. There's kind of like key moments where he describes, the ozone sort of like Swiss cheese, and there's holes, and you kind of get a sense that like, okay, there's storms. But in terms of these particular set pieces, maybe some of the more focus points when Jeff, or rather Finch, is fearful of other people, some of those moments, I imagine that you guys spend a little bit more time envisioning what the set piece looks like.
Well, yes and no, because the thing is that when you're working on projects like that, very often, so the thing not to forget is that the production designer usually can be experienced in illustration, which is we were lucky to have, because Tom is great at using ZBrush, but mostly those guys are amazing. Especially Tom comes from a theater background; they're amazing at building stuff, And for us, it's almost like that's where we kind of sit back and enjoy. Those guys can come up with. We can be asked to design some key elements in order to, like those you're seeing, like in terms of. But these are more gonna, I think, help kind of the VFX team probably, where there's gonna do matte paintings, compositing, all that stuff. But those guys that build those sets, it's a huge team of people that build those sets with huge responsibilities, and those guys are just geniuses at what they do. They're like artisans that are just incredible, and it's almost magical to see it happen, where those people can build something in one day, and then 2 days later they have to strike it down. And so for us, when it comes to designing specific sets, there was the interior that we did that was more specific for sure, and the interior was based actually on very specific plans that we got. They knew right away where they were going to film, so they gave us specific plans, and we were asked to add wall, remove a wall, change the lighting, and things like that. So our job was to take those plans, put them in 3D in a rough manner, before a set designer was going to take that and really own it. So those illustrations were done using those plans, and then I was lucky enough to go and visit the place actually in Arizona when I was working on the project, and it was an abandoned power plant, basically.
Wow. That's an interesting topic, and I imagine very much so. It's outside of these one specific cases where you're replacing a few details in a space that is going to be shot on location. Just what you guys are really doing is envisioning and sort of setting the tone, and really creating that inspiration point to then go into that production design.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the mood is really the key thing, and that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning: is what are people going to feel when they're going to see the image, not what they're going to think, what they're going to feel.
Absolutely. This one here with the light leak coming through, that one's spectacular.
Yeah, that was done much later in the process. That was done like very close to filming, if I remember, and they had just found a location, but they were not sure, so they wanted to see what it would look like if it was entirely painted and tagged and with the windows tagged. And there's something, once again, extremely poetic about those choices made for those images.
Absolutely. It's such a feeling. It emotes something from you as you look at these images and then build those sets and replicas to these. In maybe this is a great segue to then transition into, we've talked a lot about just conceptual design to 3D design. Can you guys tell us a little bit about the transitional phase to getting into production design and going from 3D to real in the visual effects process?
Well, we never touched the VFX process. I mean, it's not true. sometimes we do. But I don't know, Alex, you want to talk about that transition from, I guess, the pitch into the film itself, and then production design, whether it's animated or live action, they're similar.
I mean, I could speak more on animation than live action, but I think the big thing going from what we do in the art department versus towards transitioning it into it being a feasible built thing that we see on screen. David, you kind of hammered this into my skull. It's just scale. You always need to make sure your scale is 100% correct. Any models you build in the art department, if it's based off of principal photography from the production designer, or if it's based off a previous model from the CG department and animation, if your scale is incorrect, once it comes time to build those things, everything is just going to be foobar, and you're going to have all kinds of headaches. So there's a certain element of extreme precision that needs to come into that intermediary step from going from the art department into full production design. And as a designer, as a concept artist, I think being cognizant of those scale things and being cognizant of the exact parameters of each thing that you're designing and building is very important.
Yeah, I fully agree with Alex, because scale is about how things relate to one another. So when you have a character, well, does it work in a space? Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it once we've designed the character, is it going to work in the lighting that we have it? He has he has an orange head. Is that going to match in the blue lighting? And honestly, that's when I said the S hits the fan. Is that's when all things that you thought were kind of like set in stone, all your dreams, boom, they disappear in the powder, and you have to okay, well, we're gonna have to adjust everything. And that means that when you're like in pre-production, and you're being asked to go back to the first image you've done and fix everything, because everything has changed since then. But they still like the image, but they cannot send that image to VFX, because if they send that image, people are going to be confused because it doesn't look like what is ended up looking. You see what I mean? So it creates like a convolution of complexities that is testing of your personality.
Yep, totally.
And this is all projects. No, I'm not saying this one or any. This one actually
constant for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's very interesting to hear that dichotomy between the conceptual phase and the designers and getting into actual production. Very much so, you are working in tandem, trying to make their jobs easier, and of course, make that process fluid, which is very clearly seemed to have worked well in this particular project. You guys have done such a great job of keeping a lot of the design work that's been done here and been able to make that work. It's such a stunning film, and it's a very touching film at the same time, which is amazing to see. I want to thank you guys for sharing a lot on this design process and showing us such a great breadth of detail on the work. Your particular duo seems to work very well. I think we'd all love to see you guys work together again. Is there anything in the future coming up for Pitch Dev Studios? Can you talk a little bit about what you have coming up on the plate, David?
Yeah, a project that we worked on with Alex is Black Adam. That's going to be a big one that's going to come. I don't know if it's next year or I think it's next year.
2022, I think.
Yeah, that's a big one we worked on. But I mean, I find what you said so interesting. Is I want to go back super quickly to that. Is that a lot of people think that designing is just like, I'm going to do a pre-drawing and then you deal with it. It's not that at all. I mean, there's something that's super important when it comes to be a designer is you are the carrier of the torch, and if you don't carry the torch all the way to the end, your job didn't mean anything, So there is like a sense of responsibility that has to come from every single one of the designers that's on the team, which is like, this is a baby I need to carry and protect as much as I can all the way to the finished product, So Just
That's
a
a great.
message to all the designers out there, you know.
No, that's a great comment to make, and I know that there's many people out there in the industry that appreciate that. They're, in this particular sense, this maybe my opinion is a little biased, but in this design world, especially for a project like this, you guys are really the true heroes. But when it comes to working with production and making that function, it does require you to work, and think about those people, and hopefully they think about you in that process as well, and how much goes into this.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off that, there's a very specific amount of responsibility that I think every designer and artist needs to cherish when they're on a project, because no matter how small your role is, everything you do is helping feed into everything else going on there. And if you don't take that responsibility and own up to it, you're part of the chain, your link in the chain, that could be something that impacts something else down the line that you aren't even aware of. So just knowing how serious your role is, no matter what you're doing, I think is very important for designers and artists working on film.
Yeah, absolutely. Those that are watching this, definitely this is some great commentary and insight into that next level and really what makes or breaks what is really great content. And you guys are truly at the peak of your design capabilities. Obviously, again, I think you guys are the true heroes here. Hopefully, well, true. Hopefully, that's one of the great things going back to ZBrush in itself is you're constantly learning and you're constantly evolving and you're getting better at this stuff all the time. And that's the best part about being an artist, right?
Yeah,
that's the cross to bear.
Yeah.
Well,
I feel like that's kind of our burden as creatives, right? Just making sure you never get caught slouching, never get caught sloughing.
Absolutely. And very much so being able to sort of work in these small teams and not get caught up in a lot of the other distractions as well, I feel like is such a great space to be in. And it's so great to see you guys working at such a close range and being able to bring these ideas to fruition. It was a true pleasure to watch the film. I've watched it a few times myself already. So I look forward to, hopefully we'll be able to have that conversation on maybe Black Adam in the future, and look more to what you guys are doing at Pitch Dev Studios. So to wrap it up, I just want to say thank you, Alex. Thank you, David, for talking so much about this. Thank you, Yariv. And
thanks a lot, Yariv, for being the driver.
You, Yariv. If I could add one more thing at the end, though, just outside of being, responsible and capable as artists, I think it's also important to be responsible and capable as people. I think everything at Pitch Dev only works as strong as it does because everyone is very down to earth, very friendly, very humble. And it's that beginning of personality, that melding of people before even the art gets involved, that was very important. So it's just be a good person to work with, and everything else will kind of fall into place after that.
Agreed.
Those are great words to end on and great words to live by. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.